It's Outside the Book from the 2012 Southern Kentucky Festival of Books. I'm Barbara Deeb, and honored to have with us right now best-selling author Carl Hiaasen. Thanks for being here.
Oh, thanks for having me.
You've got several books out, and I want to talk about each and every single one of them, but in particular, Skinny Dip, you mentioned that HBO is looking at it as possibly developing it for a series.
Yeah, they're working on the script, and we'll see. You know, it's Hollywood, but Michael Keaton is a producer, and he wants to be in it, and he's a great guy, and I hope it works out. But you know, you don't get your hopes up too high when you're dealing with Hollywood. But some of the best writing right now is going on these cables, HBO, Showtime. There's a lot of great screenwriters that have started working in that medium, and so I've got my fingers crossed.
Do you get any input as it relates to, I mean, I know it varies, but in particular, will you have some input if it should proceed?
I do in this particular case. I mean, the screenwriter he's a great writer, Michael Oates Palmer, and he's in touch with me a lot, and I put my 2 cents in. I don't know if it does any good. It makes me feel better to do it, but they've been great about asking me what I thought about certain things, and sometimes you don't. Some projects you never hear from them again. So, but I can handle it either way.
But still, there's got to be that it's got your name on it, or it's got your name affiliated with it, so you're hoping for some kind of.
You know, it's true, but after many years and having scripts written on almost all the novels, and most of them were never made into films, and at the end of it, it's not a terrible thing when they don't make it into a film if they pay you in the meantime. Because sometimes in looking at those scripts, I think, oh my, this would have been a nightmare.
So it's almost a blessing in disguise.
Yeah, and because you don't have the ultimate control at all, you don't have final say, anything. So all you can do is keep your fingers crossed and hope that it's in good hands. But you can't let it get in the way of writing the novels. And I've seen it happen with writers. It's a deadly thing where they get so carried away with whatever's going on with the movies that they forget that their job is to go write another book, because it's two entirely different disciplines.
Well, let's talk a little bit about, because what I'm getting from you is a sense of a tie that you have to your writing, or a closeness that you have to your books.
Well, I think every writer has pride when it comes to what they've written, but on the other hand, you have to be realistic, and when you change mediums, there's going to be a change. I had a play that was done from a book I did called Lucky You. It was done in Key West, and it was done in the West End of London for a while, and it was phenomenal. And of course, they took some great liberties with the story and some of the characters, but I thought they did just a wonderful job with it. And so I wasn't tied into the idea of don't change anything, because that's just not realistic. It's not going to happen. But really, the happiest time, or the best time, is when you're in your office writing another book, and just don't worry about whatever else has happened. You got to focus on what your project is at hand.
You mentioned office, so that's how you write. You have an office connected to your house. Is that how it goes?
I have a separate office now. I also have one connected to the house, but I find that I get more done when I leave the house. Writers are incredibly lazy, generally speaking, and by that I mean they can be very disciplined, but you look for excuses not to write. And if I hear the dog, if the dog's whining outside the door of my office, I use that as an excuse to stop what I'm doing, and I'll go walk the dog when I should be sitting there writing. So it's easier when I'm sort of locked away and just zeroed in on the project. It's very tempting to,
distractions.
Every time the doorbell rings, you think, oh, good, now I don't have to write. But if I'm off in a different place, I get more done.
Distractions. So what's your source of inspiration? Do you say you get a genesis of an idea and you say, I'm going to go and play with this, mold it?
Yeah, my inspiration is the size of my mortgage. That's my
gotcha.
inspiration.
Okay.
I keep writing.
Well, you're very honest.
No. What writers do, I mean, your job as a writer, is obviously to be true to your characters and true to what you want to write about, but it's also to produce. I mean, your job is to, in my case, produce books that are funny, that make people laugh, make them think a little bit, make them laugh for the right reasons. But your inspiration is that you have, for instance, with the kids' books, I get so many letters, and you realize that they're all waiting for the next book. That's inspiring.
Wow.
For the adult novels, the grown-up novels, I mean, I just have a tremendous fan base, and I feel, as we talked before we went on the air, I feel this guilt when I'm not working, when I'm not it's not compulsiveness. It's that you've got people. You're lucky enough to have people who want to read your stuff. You should be sitting down, producing more stuff, and that's in itself is a huge inspiration.
So it's a responsibility. You feel a responsibility
You do,
to your
because
readers. Sure.
you're so fortunate and blessed in the marketplace we have now in fiction.
Yes.
You're successful, and that you have my fans are so loyal that I just feel like I gotta keep working, and I could take time off, and maybe it would be healthier if I did, but I know it would eat away at me.
Right, it wouldn't be worth
No.
it. Let's talk about skipping that genre, and Hoot, extremely popular.
Yeah.
How do you get from that place, and a Newbery winner, but how do you get from writing in that voice to adult voice?
Well, I mean, it was really the sensibility is very similar. The irreverence is the humor. Obviously, some of the adult situations that you encounter in books like Skinny Dip or Star Island, they're not going to be in the kids' books, but the point of view, the narrative point of view, is basically the same. It's as my wife said, it should be very easy for me to write as an adolescent, because I haven't really progressed past that point anyway. So it wasn't that hard. It was a part of my life that I enjoyed those years, and I was doing some writing even then. So for me, it wasn't as big a transition as I thought. And I have a wonderful editor at Random House Children's Books who said, the one thing, I'm going to give you one piece of advice, is you do not write down to kids. Don't. You write it at your own level, because they're smart, they catch on, and they know immediately when you're trying to, and that was the best advice. She's absolutely right. They get the joke the first time, don't repeat it, don't over-explain things.
Them.
You just tell your story, and they're going to dig it, and then she was right.
What about humor, though? Humor is a difficult place to walk.
It is. It's satirical humor in particular, when it's not necessarily slapstick, when the setup is when you're trying to make a point. And you walk this line because you're trying to write something suspenseful and funny at the same time. And with humor, if you flop, if you fail, if the joke doesn't work, if the line doesn't work, if the characters, you fall flat on your face.
Mm-hmm.
So it requires a lot of rewriting. I mean, a lot of agonizing over adjectives. The timing,
sure, timing.
Of a sentence is much more so than if you're writing a straight sort of bare-knuckle thriller, where it's much more plot dependent. In my books, the characters are really, they're character-driven novels, and the stories come from the characters. But the humor is probably obviously what I have to work the hardest at.
You know, one of our authors earlier today talked about how significant his characters are in that they drive the plot.
Mm-hmm.
He does not subscribe, and I know it varies, but he does not subscribe to the plot driving the characters.
I agree completely. I would be bored out of my mind if the plot drove the characters, because that isn't how it works in real life. The real life is character driven. None of us have a script. None of us know how it's going to end. The plot tends to emanate from the people in your life and in my life, and the sort of the collision of characters, and that's in my view what a novel should do. I don't, maybe I'm not disciplined enough to write just a plot-driven novel where you can plug in your characters, but I have the characters, and the plot has to grow from them and follow the natural arc that they would take it.
And so what about your characters? Do they speak to you? Have you ever gotten to the place where they have come through you?
No, I mean, they become part of your family. In this case, with a kid's book like Chomp, I think maybe it took about 9 months to write, but that whole cast of characters is in your head for the 9 months, as much as really your own family is. And it's true with the grown-up books as well. I'm not sure they're speaking to me, but they're always on my mind. I'm wondering, would they do this? Are they saying the right? I mean, you can't ever put them to bed until the book is gone to the publisher. And that's the way it should be. You should, you wake up in the middle of the night agonizing about something one of them said. He wouldn't really say that, would he? And you go back, you run the next morning, and you try to fix that piece of dialogue. I mean, that's the sort of thing the writers, good writers, torture themselves with.
What about the future of books? There's so much being said. Will we 10 years from now have this in our hands, or is it all going to be digital?
I'll tell you what's interesting with the rise of ebooks is that in the kids market, the young adult market, for example, they're still buying the books. The percentage of ebooks is still relatively small. Kids like to have a book in their hand. Now, I know some of them use the Nooks and they use the Kindles, but if you look at the sales figures and how it breaks down, most kids who want a book go to a bookstore and buy a book. So that's good. It's good for bookstores. In the adult fiction market, it's changing tremendously, and you're happy to have people who reading no matter what they're reading. I'm not worried about the book so much as I am about bookstores, which are such an important part of a community.
Sure.
The brick and mortar store where you would go browse, and I think they're endangered because if more and more people are ordering online. E-books online, they're not making that trip, they're not packing the kids in the car.
Right.
And when you go and you're browsing, you rarely leave with just one book.
You explore.
But online,
Yes.
And that's what I worry about because in many communities, those are a real centerpiece to the community.
Well, continued success to you,
Well,
and thank you for joining
Thanks
us.
for having me on.
Carl Hiaasen from Outside the Book.
Thanks.
From Baby Mouse to Squish, we are joined by author Matthew Holm. 4 letters, H-O-L-M. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
You know, your books are so fun, and I understand there's another name on your books, and it's Jennifer Holm. That's your sister.
Yep, she's my big sister.
So, wow.
She bosses me around, tells me what to draw.
Things never change, do they?
No, they really don't.
So she writes the books, you illustrate them.
That's right. It's a pretty collaborative process. We work back and forth. She'll write things, I'll do some editing and some revisions, and then I do some drawing, and then she actually does the layout, so she figures out where all the drawings are going to go before I do my final work.
So let's go back in time just a little bit.
Yeah.
You have a background as an editor and in magazines.
Yeah, I actually started out as a writer, a professional writer and editor. I worked for Country Living magazine, and did that for 8 years, writing about kitchens and home restoration and that sort of thing. And my sister was a young adult historical fiction author, and she always wanted to make a comic book of her own because she grew up with 4 other brothers, and she had to read all of our comics growing up and wanted a girl's comic. So she said, well, let's do this comic. I have this character in mind called Baby Mouse. And I said, okay, and I had been drawing comics ever since I was a kid, so she brought me in to do the drawing.
And lo and behold, the rest as they say. So you got Baby Mouse. Baby Mouse is put in different situations. We have Baby Mouse Rockstar, Baby Mouse Runs for President, the
Right.
Baby Mouse musical. So, you know, let's talk about the character and developing and taking that character from the written word
Yep.
to the visual space. That's a whole different ballgame.
You know, it's very interesting. Jenny writes the story first, and she uses a storyboard. She came from an advertising background, and so she thinks very visually in terms of how things are going to look. She always was thinking of camera moves and that sort of thing. And so she'll describe the character, but then I have to sort of act it out almost. You know, I have to draw the character with all these emotions, and sometimes she's very up, sometimes she's very down, and it involves a lot of looking in the mirror and making funny faces and things like that.
Well, and then it's one thing to see them, to know what you want. It's another thing to adapt it to the page.
Yeah, so it's I don't know. It can be a challenge sometimes, but sometimes it just comes right out of you. You don't. It works better a lot of times. You just don't think about what they're going to do. It's like
And
you
just
say,
let
like,
it happen.
Like this is how she feels. Like okay, boom, and then it comes out right.
Don't belabor the
Exactly.
point. So Baby Mouse now is a part of the family, I suspect.
I guess so. Yeah, I know. We
Yeah.
didn't have a big enough family. We need Baby Mouse too.
But I mean, that's important in the way you broach the Baby Mouse books, because now you know Baby Mouse.
Right, exactly. It's definitely become different as we moved along. When we were first starting it, feeling it out, and we'd say like, is this something she would do? Is this something she would not? And now like we know exactly how she would respond to pretty much every situation. So
Now you said your audience is the 2nd to 4th graders,
Yeah.
the young adults, and they like Baby Mouse. And why do you think that? I mean, aside from the fact that she's adorable, but what is it that attracts? Is it the comic book like?
I think that's a huge part of it. You know, when we were growing up, we read a lot of comic books. Everything from Charles Schultz, Peanuts, Charlie Brown, Snoopy, to Marvel and DC superheroes comics. And it was a very natural part of our learning how to read. We would read Dr. Seuss, then we'd read some comics, then we moved on to chapter books. And when we became older, we found it was strange that there weren't really comics for kids anymore. And they really seem to respond to them. I mean, I don't know, I think there's some aspect of they feel like they're getting away with something, but by the time they're done, they've read an entire story. There's the same amount of emotional involvement going on. There's a lot of big words sometimes, but with the pictures, they can puzzle them out and they understand what's going on.
This is a very good point. So in essence, what I'm hearing you say is this is the way we get kids to books.
Absolutely.
You know?
It's
matter
definitely
how.
it was a stepping stone for us, and I think it really can be for other kids too.
You have another character named Squish.
Yes.
Where'd Squish come from?
Well, Squish, he's an amoeba. And his whole adventure takes place on the microscopic level. You know, goes to a microscopic school with other creatures, other parameciums, and that sort of thing. And our parents were in the medical profession growing up. Our dad was a pediatrician, our mom was a nurse. And our dad, you know, he'd bring his work home from the office. They'd talk about what happened in the office that day, which was like what color snot was coming out of kids' nose and stuff. This is while we're eating dinner, mind you. So I think microbes were always in the back of our minds when we were thinking about creating a new character.
And how popular has Squish become? Because I think a lot of kids could definitely relate to that.
Squish has been good. It's been out for a year now, and kids seem to be responding well to it. The boys like it. You know, sometimes the boys get a little concerned because Baby Mouse is pink, and they're like, I don't want to read a pink book. You know, we tell them it's not pink, it's lightish red. You know, you shouldn't be afraid of it. But Squish has a nice slimy green interior, so they seem to take to that a little bit more.
And so what's ahead for you? I mean, is this something that you would aspire to have cartoon, you know, like actually take it to the screen?
Let's hope so, yes. We'd
Yeah?
love to see, you know, Baby Mouse on the big screen or Squish on the big screen, but, you know, that's Hollywood. That's sort of out of our hands.
But just along the way, you know, earlier you referenced Dr. Seuss and some
Yeah.
of the greats. I mean, is that something that when, you know, certainly that had an effect on who you are as a writer.
Absolutely.
But is that something in the back of your mind that you think, gosh, if I could get to that place?
I don't think it doesn't seem possible, and it's strange when you are a children's author and you hear from kids like, oh, you know, your work really had an impact on me. Like, I really hated reading books, and then now I read them all the time. Like, really? Like, I did that? It's like, I'm just working out of my home office trying to do what I think is funny. And so it's strange when you have that kind of impact. But to imagine that you could be in that place, it sort of doesn't seem real.
Just surreal, actually. So how do you work? Every day you go into an office and
Every
you make
day
yourself work?
we've got a spare bedroom. That's what I work out of, and I sit down. And I'm usually we're working on more than one book at the same time. So I'm either doing early sketches for one of the books, or you know, Jenny will be working on the next manuscript, and then she'll send it to me. And then sometimes, so a couple weeks I'll be just pencil sketching. A couple weeks I'll be working on the computer, because all my final art is actually done inside the computer. So a lot of times I'm just drawing for 5, 6, 7 hours at a time.
Could Baby Mouse live without the words?
Could she live without the words? I don't think so. It's a tight marriage between the two things. You know, it's just another way of telling the story. And it helps to have the visuals, but except for a couple scenes where you really see her face drop, and there's some drama in not having any words in those scenes. Just like in movies, there's some scenes where it's a lot more dramatic if no one says anything. So
I love it.
It's good for a punch, but I wouldn't want to have no words throughout the whole book.
Well, continued success to you.
Thank
and
you.
maybe we'll see Baby Mouse and Squish on the big screen
Well,
one
let's
day.
hope.
Who knows? We've been talking with author Matthew Holm, 4 letters, Holm, about his characters, Baby Mouse and Squish, from outside the book, here from the 2012 Southern Kentucky Festival of Books. If we could get inside the brain of this next guest, let me tell you, it would be a plethora of sports, memorabilia, history, and you name it. Joining us right now is Lloyd Pink Gardner. Thanks for being here, Lloyd.
It's awesome to be here. And you know, I can't introduce myself in 5 minutes.
No, but we're going to get to the point about the book called The Kentucky Colonels of the ABA. And just some of your background, you worked with the infamous Ed Diddle. You have so much, like I said, if we could get in that brain, it would be a dangerous thing. But what is it that you're hoping through a book like this to bring to a new generation?
I'm hoping that this book just brings back the memory of the Kentucky Colonels, particularly, who won a world championship in 1975, and I can say that because we challenged the NBA champion Golden State Warriors for $1 million, winner take all. Caesar's Palace would produce it. They refused, and we told them, if you do not play us, we're going to use world championship on our rings, and that's what we did. The real sad thing about it is we played them in exhibition the next year for nothing, and we beat them very handedly.
Now, he's talking like he knows because you were an insider. You were the manager.
Well, I was actually the trainer. Let me go back just a little bit because of Western Kentucky. My high school coach was named Forrest Abel, and he's a legend was just inducted this past summer into the Western Kentucky Athletic Hall of Fame. And he actually started against Western when he got out of high school in the early 50s. His girlfriend came to Western, so he transferred and started against Louisville for Western the next year. And I never did tell anybody, but Louisville gave him a refrigerator. That's illegal, isn't it? But he cut me in the 9th grade in 1958 in Louisville, Kentucky at Fairdale High School. He said, Lloyd, I want you to become a trainer and a manager, and I will get you with Mr. Diddle when you graduate. He followed through with that. I become Mr. Diddle's manager. I worked 2 years with him and 3 years with Johnny Oldham. And I lived with Mr. Diddle those times and drove him most every place he went in those later years. But I don't think, Barbara, he ever knew my name. He always called me manager.
So he knew who you
he
were.
Knew
he
who
just
I was.
may not
he knew
have
how
known
to get
your
hold
name.
of me.
What would you want people to know about Ed Diddle? You know, most of us will never know him. We know of him, but what would you want them to know about him?
Ed Diddle cared about his players. I mean, I remember driving him over to Smith Grove to these auctions where they would have all these canned farm goods and things, and we would completely load the car and we would unload them at his house. Up at the time was by College High, and we'd go in there late at night and he'd put 1 pair of green beans here for Keller, 1 can of green beans here, 1 corn here. We go right down the table. The next door we'd go down and get chickens from the chicken factory, and we'd deliver all this stuff, cases of chickens and all this food to players, and if they needed a coat, he got them a coat. I mean, he was just a caring person, a very brilliant person, a great public relations man. I used to drive him around. They changed mayors here in Bowling Green, and he always had a double car space painted yellow in front of his house. So he always had a parking place. And
he was a clever man, too,
He was very
wasn't
clever.
he?
So I'd drive him around. When the mayor wasn't in, he'd say, roll your window down, vote for Top Miller, he'll give me a parking space back. So he was a very unique person.
Now, you collaborated on this book with Gary P. West. The book is called The Kentucky Colonels of the ABA, and just, you know, it's available on Amazon. You can buy it at bookstores, but you would hope that this will perpetuate the history, really
The
take
history of the Kentucky Colonels. We interviewed over 50 people, and what's very unique, when the team folded, I was the only person John Y. Brown kept, and he wanted to make me a millionaire. I couldn't go at his pace. I mean, he'd call me at all hours of the night, and I had a young family, but I kept stuff from the office. I have the scorebooks. I have the press releases. I have diaries that I kept myself. I made 2 commitments when we wrote the book. Number 1, I would not throw any player under the bus on something that he might have done on the road. Number 2, I didn't want any cuss words in the book. I didn't feel like I could go to church every Sunday and promote a book that had cuss words in it. So we missed twice, I think, in the whole book, but we did a pretty good job of it.
You did a real good job. It's called Kentucky Colonels of the ABA. One of its co-authors, Lloyd Gardner. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Outside the Book continues from the 2012 Soki Book Fest, the Southern Kentucky Festival of Books. I'm Barbara Deeb, and delighted to have with me, as always, Silas House. This is a man who I learned about many years ago now, when they told me there's this guy, he's a really good writer, he's a mailman, and he writes on his mail route back in Lilly, Kentucky, and that's how it all began. You knew you always had it in you.
Yeah, I pretty much wrote my first novel on the mail route, and I would think about it all day long while I was out there on the mail route by myself, and then when I would get home and get a chance to sit down, you know, I would write down what I had thought that day, and slowly a novel came together out of that.
And that novel was?
Clay's Quilt. It
Clay's
came out
Quilt.
in 2001.
Your very first novel.
Yep.
Since then, you've written several more. Your most recent one, the current one, Same Sun Here?
Same Sun Here.
Okay, talk a little bit about that.
Well, it's a novel that's being promoted for young adult readers, 10 years old and up. I wrote it for everybody. Adults seem to like it as much as 10-year-olds, maybe more. It's about a 12-year-old basketball star living in Eastern Kentucky who becomes pen pals with a 12-year-old Indian immigrant girl living in New York City. And they sort of are forced to write to each other, you know, by their teachers. And they come to realize, they start out thinking they're going to be so different. You know, he's from Kentucky, she's from India. but they realize how similar their cultures are. They realize how similar they are. And they sort of become better people by knowing each other. And it's all about how once we get to know each other, we're a lot more alike than we might think that we are. It's about the lost art of letter writing. Um, it's about standing up for what you believe in despite a personal loss, you know. So it was really interesting to write a novel with another author. But it was easy because we were writing letters to each other. So we decided we would just write letters to each other and we wouldn't talk about the novel and we would just let the plot arise organically. And so it's just a novel of reaction, you know. Neela wrote me a letter as Mina, her character, and then I would respond as River. And we just wrote back and forth over the course of one school year. And the plot arose on its own, and it's just a really sweet book, and I'm really proud of it.
And a unique experience. Same Sun Here is what it's called. You know, I've interviewed you over the years, and I often quote you about just how your characters will often come to you without you. I mean, this voice speaks through you. How critical is that to the books that you write?
How critical is it to the book? I think that's everything, you know. I mean, without a strong character, the story doesn't matter. Nothing matters if your character's no good. I mean, when you think about your favorite books, like To Kill a Mockingbird, you know, how can you think about that book and not think about Scout and Jim and Atticus and Calpurnia and, you know, I mean, and Boo Radley? It's all about the characters. That's what speaks to us. That's what we care about, are the people. Or the characters. I mean, if you're talking about Old Yeller, you know, the dog is a character that we care deeply for, and that's why we love that book. So it's everything.
It's everything. You know, speaking of everything, this man has done just about everything. You know, I've traced your career. You've written a play, you've written now a short story, and I want to talk a little bit about that short story. It's called The Recruiter, and I had the distinct pleasure of visiting Larkspur Press, where Gray Zeitz printed that book, just hand printed. It's beautiful, and it's a lovely story, Recruiter. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, Sue Masick is a banjo player and a singer that lives in Washington County, Kentucky. She's a member of the Real World String Band, but she also does a lot of her own songwriting. You know, she has a solo album, and on that solo album, she has a song called Brennan's Ballad, which is all about a woman who goes off to fight in Iraq, and she's injured, and they put her in the Walter Reed Army Hospital, and the Walter Reed Army Hospital was condemned because it was overrun with roaches and rats and mold. And, you know, we were putting our veterans in there, our injured veterans in there. So we talk this big talk in America about how much we care about our troops, and then we put them in a hospital like that, you know. So it's just unbelievable. So I love that song so much. I wanted to expand on it, so I wrote a short story based on it. So I owe that whole book and short story to Sue Masick.
Sue Masick, The Recruiter, Silas House, it's always a pleasure to have you. What's ahead in the next year?
I'm working on a new novel about a man who kidnaps his own child and runs off to Key West. So it's my first book to be completely set outside the region.
There you go, to be determined. Thank you, as always.
Thank you.
We've been talking with Silas House from the 2012 Southern Kentucky Festival of Books for Outside the Book. I'm Barbara Deeb.